That's why we've been getting the worst end of the stick in terms of water rights.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming back onto the show. Let's get serious.
No worries.
Yeah,
Yeah,
water's important, and gardens are cool, and people need to eat. And we have a lot of garden
yeah,
deserts
understood.
in cities, and it would be great if these kids
Yes.
and families could have access to great food instead of just like lawns and
I
stuff like
think
that.
those neighborhood gardens are the best things since sliced bread. I
Yeah,
really think that they provide kids with a different view of the world, and because growing something and making it yourself, and having it grow and then eating it is kind of the most primal natural thing you could do.
yeah, you're completing a
Not
completing a
the most,
cycle. Yeah, you're
completing
completing
a
a
cycle within
cycle and
itself,
living off of it.
without hurting anything, which is probably the biggest
Yeah,
lesson right there.
yeah, that's dope. I mean, as a vegan, I couldn't agree more. And it's just such a good
I
use
think
of
plus
space.
it would yeah, it would give these young people in the neighborhoods some differences in terms of their food diet too, because
For
unfortunately
sure.
what's cheap is the huge processed foods,
Yeah,
which is not good for you.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And studies show that that nature in neighborhoods just adds to the beauty and the livability of the neighborhood.
Not only that, but the property values. I mean,
Yeah.
just to be kind of gross and capitalistic,
Hmm.
the property values go up when you have beauty. Oh, who would have thunk it? Uh,
Yeah.
you know, when you
Yeah.
add to a neighborhood instead of taking away, putting
Right.
on, the thing I think is the most criminal are these early check places, these cash or check places.
Yeah.
Those people need to be shut down by the Congress, because those people are evil, and all they do is suck money from the poorest of the poor.
You know who else does that though? Banks.
Oh, I'm not saying that banks are flawless in this thing, but I'm saying that they in particular are my targeted hatred, for in terms when we're talking about the economies of poor people and how
Right.
they live.
Right. But what I'm saying is they couldn't do it without the banks.
Oh
Right.
no,
If
yeah, the
banks
banks giving
the
them the
banks made
loans,
it,
the back,
well,
yeah.
not just the loans, getting to the really shallow part. If banks made it easy for folks to cash their checks,
Yeah,
this wouldn't be a problem in the first place. So a
right,
bank will say, "Oh well, it's got to be drawn from this bank in order for you to cash it here. So that's like the first step. You can't do it. Oh
right,
well, you have to have a banking account with us now in order to cash your check, even though it's drawn at that bank. Oh well,
right.
we'll let you cash your check, but we're going to charge you a $5 convenience fee to cash your check plus a percentage,
Oh, absolutely.
of the check. And so it's just like one after another. And so that's what makes the check cashing places so convenient
To be
is
honest, I think if we had a central bank in America, this wouldn't even be an issue today,
yeah,
because the pressure would be on the central bank to do exactly what you're saying, and then that would force the rest of the industry to follow likewise or fall behind.
right.
So central banking to me is a prime issue. I am not
You
I am
mean
not
like
with
a socialized bank?
uh I wouldn't call it that, but yeah, that's generally what it does.
Yeah,
It answers to the will of the people instead, and it would also prepare us for spikes in the world economy a little better.
right.
Um, we our lows would not be as low and our highs would not be as high. Who cares about that? I mean, that's just people dying on the streets, right?
Right. So earlier we were getting back to one of
Oh
our
yeah,
favorite topics of where the U.S. falls in terms
yes.
of left or right, and I always agree with folks who say that we fall on the right. You do not.
I do
So
not.
my assertion is that this is a world view and a world perspective. So that by adopting the attitude that we do not, you're just kind of seeing it through our lens, which by
Sort
nature of
of.
its objective is unobjective.
Sort of. I think that the country is too big and too varied. This is my argument with you, is that the country is too big and too varied to give us a one stop shop credential in terms of
That's fair. That's certainly fair. I mean, I think um, at the end of the day, if you're going to label what a country is, there's got to be a way of doing it and still recognizing what you're talking about. We're certainly a huge country and a bit of an anomaly. There are other countries that are huge as well. But I
we're
think
not
at the
we're not we're not geocentric, and we're not racially centric. We're not. I mean, even as much as we'd like to, certain people would love that terminology. We're not really.
but why does that matter?
Well, it matters. It matters in terms of the backgrounds of people have a lot to play into whether a country falls left or right of the spectrum. Um,
You're not. What you're doing is you're explaining like who we are, but you're not explaining a way that we still are who we are. In other words, yeah, we are a diverse nation. Like that's
yes,
who we are. So's the UK. So are various other nations out there. Specifically, certain cities like London and New York
sure,
City.
sure.
So we understand that we're diverse, and that makes us who we are. But we're
And that's a
still
that's a sign of strength. That's not a sign of weakness, which I think a lot of people, it gets lost in the debate. And if people don't reaffirm that, you tend to lose focus. That
but with
diversity
the
is strength.
yeah, that is very true. And with diversity often comes liberal ideals as well.
Yes, absolutely.
That being said, though, on a world stage, we still fall. You know, um, we're not as far to the left as other nations. I mean,
No,
that's
no, we're
not
not.
necessarily a bad thing, but it's been
It's
true for
just
a
a
long
thing.
time. Yeah,
It's just
it's
a
it's a
thing.
thing. Yeah.
I understand that. I understand that, but I don't believe that you could classify the entire nation as, like my friend was doing in the other group, saying it was a center right nation. I don't
Well,
believe in that.
well, all you're doing is you're taking an average. Like you
Right,
have to be able to classify. Like we are a world of nation states. You have to be
right.
able to classify us that way. Otherwise, you're going to do a really radical thing and classify us in another way. The fact that you started talking about races and ethnicities is kind of weird to me because that really has nothing to do with
Well, I,
what we're
I, I
talking about.
view that I view that ethnicities and races is an important factor, because unlike other nations who base their most of their uh, political ration on based solely on race and country of origin, we do not. We accept people from all nations, all countries, and all walks of life. Mind you, have criminal ties or ties to terrorist organizations or something like that, probably won't get in. But apart from that, you know, even with the rampant anti-American sentiment in the last 4 years, there were still the majority of people who legally immigrated to this country were from Latin American countries.
Hmm.
Um, um, so I do believe that we are superior to the quote unquote more left nations who who still base their policies on outdated social views.
Um,
I can
Yeah.
give you a perfect example: France, who constantly takes us over the woodshed for all sorts of issues. They
Okay.
are hideously racist,
Okay.
hideously racist.
Yeah.
And in terms of both their immigration policy and how they treat their immigrant policy, immigrants as a nation. The something like I read 4 years ago that before Trump got in office, that France had 44% of its young Muslim population unemployed. If we had that statistic for any particular people in the United States, we would literally, there would be riots and congressional investigations.
44% of its what young Muslim population you said,
Young Muslim population was unemployed.
and you're sure that we don't have any group that is that
I'm sure that
unemployed
it's
here?
not as that severe. Not that severe. It is. There is severe. For instance, I do believe that we are underemploying many of our minorities.
Mhm.
However, I don't believe it is that severe. Not to the level that France takes it.
Okay. Well, I mean, those are good points. Um, France, yeah, France has some major issues there in the way
And
that it's
with your
racism.
ties to Ghana, that France's crime list is long in that continent.
Yeah, I mean, so are
So are many. So are
so are
many.
most European nations. My issue is, the way that people are treated there and the social issues. How does that compare to the relationship that people have to their parties and where they fall on the spectrum? If we're talking about, if we're talking about left and right, or where nations fall on the spectrum.
Well,
Like, for instance, like most of these nations we're talking about, of course, are going to provide for their people for health care, and then for like paid family leave, and like for all this stuff that is taken for granted even amongst places that are to the right. Whereas like we still have this very
draconian view. Yeah,
backwards draconian
I
way
agree.
of treating
I
people.
agree. We don't. The problem is that America. I think what we're trying to get at is where I would fault America is not along its political lines. It's along its views of individualism versus communalism, because they associate communalism with communism or socialism, which is not correct. Communalism is a view that you are who your society is,
Hmm.
and we tend to view the world through individuals. Individuals make it. We have cults of celebrity. We
Hmm.
have cults of you made it on your own, and all sorts
Right.
of bullshit like that that does not exist in the
Hmm.
world. It just is a it's a fallacy, because even the people who say they made it had to start from somewhere, and somewhere usually involves other people, mayhap your family. That's a communal activity.
Hmm.
It could be like the state itself giving you loans to go to school. That's a state, that's a communal activity.
Okay.
It could be a number of ways that you quote unquote started on yourself, and started by yourself and to yourself, and owe nobody nothing. And unfortunately, that cruelty of heart is what I'm talking about. I'm not Damien. I'm not a person who overly feels, but
Hmm.
this cruelty of the heart is part of the individualism mantra. And I think it's very dangerous, because when you lose empathy, you lose your society.
Yeah. Well, no, I totally agree with everything that you said there. Uh, in this country, that stuff is tied to political parties, right?
Yes,
Like the rugged individualism is tied to republicanism, often
yes.
conservatism, and vice versa. So, I mean, that's kind of where that stuff comes from. So it ends up being political, but it would be interesting if we could divorce those things from being political. I don't
I
know.
think you would see a lot more because the Republicans have a lot going for them if they would stick to their core values instead of trying to deny people the right to vote or celebrity cult worship. Uh,
Like what core values?
well, their focus on the family is a lot stronger than Democrats, and
I don't know. I don't know about that. That's been their gimmick and it's been their shtick. But I don't. That's just like stuff that they say. They don't. They don't.
well, even
I
if it's
haven't seen
stuff that
any
they says
demonstrable way that they're focusing on families more. I
right,
mean, the
right,
Democrats are focusing on education
right
and caring about kids from from birth through
from cradle to
kindergarten
grave. Yeah.
and stuff like that, and caring about like mental
the
health and
the
like
problem
bullying.
the problem with Republicans is that they divorced the idea of right to life with the idea of care that life the minute it has a chance to breathe open air. Uh,
So what you're saying is that it's all bullshit. Then they don't. The Republicans don't give a shit about families. It's just talking. It's just talking points. They never have.
at this point in the Republican Party, I would say yes. I would say that's exactly true.
Yeah. Well, I mean that's the stuff that we gotta call out. Um, so yeah, I mean at this point, I really don't see a point in supporting the Republican party at all. Um, but I want to get back to how do you divorce this idea of individualism from political parties when that's how we're set up here in the United States?
I just I don't see it because I also know people from the cult of the individual on the Democratic side that they believe that they have made it on their own and they don't need anybody and blah 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 and so they so I've seen it on both sides. A lot of I think we need to start with a more primal issue. What makes you which party in terms of the United States? I'm not talking about other places. I'm not even talking about that. But the major two parties, if you were to force me one, what makes you aligned with one party or another? And I have a feeling it comes down to empathy versus non-empathy at the moment. I think Damien would agree with me if he were here. Um,
As much as I would like to agree with that, that's like a judgment, and I don't think it gets. I don't think it's an objective way of looking at people and why they choose what they
but nothing's
choose.
objective, Flav. Nothing is
Well,
objective. We always
well,
view things from our perspectives.
well. Check it out. This is to me anyway. In my view, a more um a more
Just maybe.
just a way that doesn't ascribe like blame or like values or like finger pointing, um or like a way that doesn't judge people is just to look at why people choose what they choose. So like getting back to this idea of individualism uh and the collective, that's like at the core value of why our political parties have like switched and why they are what they are. I mean,
Right.
getting back to the beginning, a lot of people, we're a huge country, like you said. We're not a monolith, and a lot of people wanted to be able to hold on to ideals from their section of the country, their
Right.
section of the world, but they also wanted to be protected from outside invaders trying to like get into the country and uh, come to war with us. So there were some trades that had to be made, and like back in the day, maybe they called it federalists versus statists or something like that. And it was like, we got to give up, we got to cough up some money to the feds so that we can be protected, right?
Right.
If people try to come in here, but at the same time, we want to retain our own values as a state. And so there became this whole bargaining where sometimes it's like, oh, you know, we'll leave it up to the states to decide how they feel about LGBTQ issues and things like that,
Right.
and then it becomes like a cop out. Um,
Yes.
so there's this struggle between states and the entire country, and so
Yes.
Republicans view Democrats as people who are willing to give up their rights, and Democrats view Republicans as people who are not fighting for universal rights for people and who would rather
That's
leave it
partially
up
true, but
to
I
the
would say
states.
that it depends on the rights that you're talking about. Republicans are more than happy to give up personal security rights for national security rights. I remember very well when they passed the Patriot Law, the Patriot Act. That we basically there was some trepidation on the left, and none to be heard of from the libertarians on the left. I'm done on the right, because they said it was necessary,
So
and so.
that's interesting. That's interesting. I guess that's the major difference between.
But we all but each party has its exceptions. You would say that the Democrats are the party of the atheists, the growing atheist movement. But I would actually counter and say that the Democrats are the last stand of value voters, because when you get to the real core of the values of their religion, it's to take care of people. It's to make sure
Mhm.
that your kids are healthy and happy.
Yeah,
It's not anything unusual. It's not, and I'm not saying that atheists don't have these values. I'm just saying that the things that they profess, the Democrats do in action. So
right.
I think that they're the last stand, because I think the Republicans have shown how flimsy their actual morals can be,
Yeah,
in response to power.
yeah. No, that's very true. I mean, that's what we were saying earlier. Is that in action, Democrats are for sure showing this stuff to be true in action, whereas the Republicans have used it as talking points.
Absolutely.
Um,
Unfortunately, it seems that we lost Joey for tonight. He seems to be having a bad reaction.
yeah. Well, we were going to talk about DMX
Oh yeah,
a bit.
let's just talk about it.
So, have you been following
I
his
haven't been
status at
following
all?
the major of the story, but I do know that I know the majors, right? Which is, unfortunately, he's had a long battle with his disease with drugs,
Mhm.
and unfortunately, it seems that he lost this last bout. And he has tried many times to go into rehab centers, and I give him all the props in the world for trying to make himself better. But the disease is just extremely strong. Drugs are not drugs because they're good for you. They're drugs because they addict you, and it doesn't matter what they do to you afterwards. It's the addiction part that is the worst of it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, and the idea to do this is just came from the fact that it's been a few days and he's still been fighting for his life, and there have been a lot of people showing him love outside of the hospital, but also from some of the conversations that we've had with some
Mhm.
of our friends and comrades, um, who we won't mention by name because they're not here, but the idea that people struggle with addictions, um, and the idea that it's like they're making personal decisions to like fight the good fight, even though they don't always land, where they'd like to,
Sure.
is is kind of an important thing to recognize.
Well, just like you, I grew up in a big city that had a lot of drug problems, a lot,
Hmm.
and a lot of my friends didn't make it out of they didn't make it out because of violence. They made it out because of the drugs. I mean, they didn't
Hmm.
make it out because of the drugs.
Right.
The drugs are just hideous, and there's people still struggling from my old hoods. for
Yeah.
from with the battle with the drugs. And unfortunately, there is no there. If there was a quick miracle cure, I could see the people who are unforgiving. I could definitely see their point, but there is no quick cure. That's a lie. Uh,
Right.
Unfortunately, it's a hard battle, and it's harsh. We have trouble fighting alcoholism, much less anything else. And it's a lifelong struggle to fight against alcoholism, and we still condemn people for drugs. Are you kidding me? How barbaric can we be?
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of been the attitude that we've taken towards drugs, alcohol, addiction, rehabilitation, incarceration. It's
Yeah.
kind of been an attitude of better than, or I can never be, what they are, or that kind of thing. Easier to separate yourself from someone else than to practice enough empathy to realize that, like,
We're all the
if
same,
not by the yeah, if not by the grace of God, you could be in the same
in the
situation.
same position.
Yeah.
But I do agree with one minor factoid. There is always a choice. The drugs were so unless you're telling me that the people were born addicted, which is of course a condition we have to deal with now. Um, it that first choice has to be up to that. I'm telling you that I this is hard to explain without seeming like a jerk. If families were stronger, if there were stronger family units, and the families could influence their children more and say that it's not worth it. The drugs, the alcoholism, it's never worth it. And show them examples, safely of people ruining their lives with this disease. There in the beginning, there's always a choice, and we fall because we fall to peer pressure. I've seen it time and time again in my life that people just fall because they want to be part of the in crowd, or they want to be part of a group. And what happens is that the drugs takes you and separates you from all of that, all of your support systems, including that original group that you were supposed to be more welded to by doing this activity. It separates you from them. So I almost feel like if we emphasize the family unit a little better, we wouldn't be in such a trouble. Like if we actually did it instead of just talking about it.
Yeah, well, there's a few things. There's certainly a lot of hypocrisy when it comes to drugs and the way that we uh, treat our loved ones, and
Yes.
the way that we educate, or the lack of education. Like, there's been so much bullshit about marijuana over the years that children kind of turn a deaf ear
Yes.
to talks about don't do drugs and stuff, because they know that they're being lied to, and
Oh, of course.
they don't respect that. Whereas,
Nancy
like,
Reagan, Nancy Reagan saying just don't do drugs is the biggest joke in the world. She was on pills all during the 60s and 70s.
yeah,
Uh, I mean, it was ridiculous. It's ridiculous. The war on drugs. First of all, I don't believe that. Let me just state for the audience, I don't believe that marijuana is a serious drug. Like I'm talking about, like heroin or cocaine or
Mhm.
crystal meth. I believe that those drugs illicit are warnings. Marijuana to me
One
is not.
sec,
Sure, sure.
one sec.